Reddit's real-life nightmares delves into spine-tingling true tales sourced directly from Reddit's most chilling threads. Encounter encounters with the supernatural and brushes with mortal danger as ordinary individuals share their harrowing experiences with the inexplicable and the macabre. Led by Read It, prepare to be gripped by fear as we journey into the heart of darkness. Subscribe now to confront the chilling truths hidden within Reddit's darkest corners.
Goliath_TL. My mother told me this story. Keep in mind my mother is a staunch Christian and does not believe in ghosts or anything of that matter, but she believes this as she was there and has no idea what to think of it. My mother's grandmother, Florence, suffered from dementia in her older years. So badly that when her dog, Fluffy, died she had it cremated and placed the ashes on the mantle. When my mother came to visit her grandmother she would make Mom say hi to Fluff by shaking the urn of ashes. Yeah, great-grandmom was nuts. Well, my mother's Aunt Lucy, daughter of Florence, died suddenly. When she died, her siblings decided to not tell her Florence about the death until after the funeral due to her already fragile mental state. They handled the funeral arrangements and everything, even bought a new dress for Lucy to be buried in. The day after the funeral they told her that Lucy had died. Before they had a chance to explain, Grandma Florence asked them for help. Lucy had come by yesterday and was upset. Grandma Florence told them that Lucy kept saying, "They're looking at me. I don't like them looking at me. I told you I didn't want them looking at me." See, Aunt Lucy's funeral had an open casket. Apparently Aunt Lucy had said previously that she didn't like open caskets and didn't want one for herself, just in case. They were obviously shaken up to hear this impossibility and tried to reason with Grandma Florence and explain this wasn't possible as Lucy was dead. Dead? No, she can't be. She was just here. She was wearing the oddest dress though, I've never seen it before. Grandma Florence then went on to explain the funeral dress, that she had never seen in person in perfect detail. Placebo bunny. I was absolutely terrified of bodies of water when I was little. Like, wailed my throat sore when anyone tried to bathe me, would never go to pool parties, cried for days if I ever even saw a puddle. No one acted like they knew why, no matter how many times I pleaded them to tell me. 17th birthday comes and a friend invites me to a party at their apartments. We are right next to a pool and I am a little wary. New friend shoves me into the pool and I lose it. I'm crying, screaming, hyperventilating, even almost piss myself. Boyfriend saves me, new friend is apologizing out her ass. I go home. I'm sitting with my foster dad and he's hugging me, just enjoying being on land and breathing. After a while he tells me he has something to tell me. You were put into foster care because your mother tried to kill you. She filled a bathtub with water and held you under until your father found her. When they asked her why, she said it was because she didn't like the way you looked at your father. She said you were looking at her with the same eyes when she held you under. My birth mother tried to drown me when I was an infant because she was jealous of my love for my birth father, and because of it, I've been scared of water my whole life. I can't even describe the chills I got when he told me that. General Jack_SG. When I was about 10 or 11 I was living with my grandmother. My bed was in the corner of my room with the long side against the wall and right up against the window. Crappy paint drawing to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Well, I slept with my head towards the wall, and I was usually turned towards the wall with the window. This window was a weird size and didn't have any blinds, just curtains. The curtains hung in front of the window so there was a small gap towards the side of the window where you could see into or out of my room if you were standing at the right angle. I was laying in bed trying to fall asleep when I turned my eyes towards the window and saw something standing there, looking right at me. It was just a silhouette, but something about the way it was shaped just felt wrong. The head was large, the body was a little too skinny, and the way it was bent over just didn't feel right at all. I tried to act like I was asleep and rolled ever so slightly to try to get a better look, but it stood back up and ran away. It was tall too, at least 6 foot. I hopped out of bed and ran into the living room where my grandmother was watching the 10 o'clock news. I told her that I saw someone looking into my window and she grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. I followed her, and we looked around trying to figure out what it was. We couldn't see anything at all, and after that night we set the curtains further back so they completely blocked the window. Whatever the hell it was, we never figured it out. Zukriam Suna. This one happened to my dad when he was a teenager. I'm not sure if it's true, but he avoids Ouija boards like the plague and almost begs for people never to use one. He lived in the middle of a huge city, and the neighborhood wasn't a wonderful place. He and two friends, let's call them Jake and Kyle, tended to hang out in graveyards and attempt little seances. Yes, it was a stupid thing to do, but they never got anything out of it. There was a spot in the main cemetery where they met up occasionally. It was like their secret spot to escape reality and simply hang with each other. It was on their way home from school, so it was never out of the way, except that Kyle usually drove. They decided to use a Ouija board one night and ask it some random questions. One of them was when Jake would die. The board answered with 1 week. They merely laughed it off and continued their usual lives. Then one day after school, about a week later, when my dad walked to that spot to see if his friends were there, he saw Jake standing there in a panic. My dad ran up to him to see what was wrong. Jake was waiting for him and said something along the lines of, "Kyle got in a bad car accident. I think he's dead. Run to his house and tell his parents." So my dad booked it to Kyle's house, and saw 2 cop cars parked on the curb. He ran inside and yelled, "Hey, I heard that Kyle was hurt. Where is he? Is he alright?" I saw Jake in the graveyard, and he told me Kyle was in a car accident. And then he noticed that Kyle was standing right there with minor bruises. Kyle, his parents, and the cops just stared at him. Kyle said confusingly, "You saw who in the graveyard?" It turns out that a car accident did occur. Jake decided to ride home with Kyle, and someone else hit them on the way. Kyle was fine, but Jake took the full hit. The Ouija board was right, after all. TLDR, a Ouija board correctly predicts my dad's friend's death, and my dad saw his ghost. Mao 5th. I don't know how creepy you'll find this, but I sure as hell got goosebumps like shit. I live in Norway, and it was winter at the time, so it was kinda creepily half dark. I was around 10 or 11, I think. I was walking to my friend for a visit, and to get to him, I had to pass over my schoolyard, no biggie. But as I got to the school grounds, I saw something that made me shit my pants. A fucking shitload of crows were plastered all over the school. Literally, hundreds of them, just sitting there, no one else was around. Needless to say, I walked around that time. The magic. This is the story of OM. In high school I had a good friend named Steve. One day freshman year, 2007-ish, he told my group of friends about an odd turn of events that happened to his brother, Tim, a couple years prior. Tim went to college somewhere in New Hampshire. One night around 2 a.m. Tim and his good friend decided they needed Dunkin' Donuts, even though the nearest Dunkin' Donuts was across state lines. I don't know much about New Hampshire's geography, but I'm told this trek involved going through a narrow highway that takes them through some woods. On the way back from Dunkin' Donuts, a mysterious car pulled in front of them on the highway. It was a red compact car with the markings scratched off, and its only defining feature was its license plate that had a black O and a green M, who will henceforth be known just as OM. Around this time Tim describes weird coincidences happening, like his phone losing service and the jazz station playing Smells Like Teen Spirit, but I'll admit it, those could have just been weird coincidences. At this time Tim and his friend were sensing some bad juju from this guy, so Tim let his foot off the gas and was happy to just let OM go off on his way. But OM wasn't done with them. As soon as Tim slowed down, OM did the same. Tim thought this was weird, but maybe if he floors it he could get around OM, but when Tim sped up so did OM. Tim and co were freaking out at this point and had no idea what they were dealing with, but they saw a curve in the road up ahead. They saw OM go around it and they decided to just stop. Their adrenaline was pumping and they weren't sure how long they sat there, but after what felt like 20 minutes they worked up the courage to continue on their way. Maybe OM would have mercy on them. But as soon as they got around the corner, OM was there. The exact same distance as they last saw him, matching their speed. OM clearly was without mercy. Tim and his friend were rightfully scared for their lives and relented to just going forward and hoping they could get out of this alive. Eventually there was a fork in the highway. One led towards the college town while the other led further into the woods. Our heroes went home while OM ventured into the unknown. Tim never saw OM again. Epilogue 1. So I was told this story my freshman year and was convinced it didn't happen, and even my buddy Steve wasn't exactly sure of its veracity. But around 2008 to 2009 I was listening to the local talk radio station while doing homework and heard a news bulletin. There was a murder in a neighboring county the previous night and the sole witness saw a car leaving the scene of the crime. She described it as a red compact car with a license plate that had a black O and a green M. I nearly shit myself. I'm in suburban Orange County, California. What the fuck is OM doing all the way over here? Maybe I was just hearing things. I ran into Steve the next day at school and he heard the same report. We learned two things: 1, neither of were crazy, and 2, that OM was fucking real. Epilogue 2. This previous May my friend Blake was on his way home from dropping off his girlfriend around 2 a.m. For some reason he decided to take a highway that leads through a canyon home. While driving along, a car pulls in front of him. It's a red compact car with a license plate that has a black O and green M. Blake was familiar with the stories and became rightfully scared and fell as far behind OM as OM let him. When they reached near the end of the canyon, OM did a U-turn and went back while Blake continued home to change his pants and sleep. Epilogue 3. This is not the first time I posted this story. In a previous thread u/Ravetti posted their own OM sighting. That is all I know about OM. I'm thoroughly convinced he's a cross-country serial killer who crosses state lines to confuse the police, but I admit it's only conjecture. The Fanoodler. I was around 13 to 14, and in my upstairs bathroom. Being lazy, I decided to go in without turning the light on, since the room was dimly lit by the light in the hallway. From the bathroom, I can see the woods in the backyard, kind of like a hill that went up into a sparsely populated second development behind mine. Anyway, I'm taking my glorious piss, when suddenly out the forest I see a light, not a direct light, like somebody shining a flashlight facing away from me, like an indirect illumination. I look at it, and I'm thinking, the hell's this? It doesn't move, it just appears and is motionless. I kind of figure it might be a tracker light that was kicked on by movement and continue about my business. The light's still on a good minute later and still facing away, and I walk up to the window. It turns completely around, like a flashlight. It's a widespread and slowly focuses and sharpens as it shines directly at me, and it's a good quarter mile away. It's a steady stream of light, and it starts slowly moving towards the window, and extremely bright. I can its reflection in the glass, but it doesn't light the room up, just a bright light directly on me. To give you an idea, this is a third-story bathroom, with a good 40-foot drop to the ground and a hill that goes up alongside of it, a quarter mile away, and this thing came at the window like it was running on solid ground. I run to turn the lights on. The second I do, it disappears, and to this day I still don't know what exactly it was. B0 den kind. Might be a bit late to the party. Also, I've posted this somewhere else before, still, relevant. I grew up in a very small village, 60 inhabitants, near to the Czech border. When we were 10, my friend and I played out in the snow in November. It was dark already, but we didn't really care about that as we played under the street lights. After like 20 minutes I first noticed what used to scare the shit out of me for quite some of the following years. On the top of the hill across a pond was an abandoned house with huge trees in the front. What I saw was a small light, just about 30 centimeters above the ground, looking like someone squatting there, holding a lantern. After a while, still seeing this light there, I asked my friend if she could see that too. She agreed, and the longer we talked about it the more we got scared and went home. When we told our parents the next day, they laughed and told us it was just a reflection of light in one of the windows, although the windows of that house were much higher. Despite being scared as hell, we decided to walk up the hill, during the day of course, and what we found there was even more creepy. There were footsteps coming out of the direction from the near woods, over pasture fences, through 20 centimeters of snow, to the mentioned tree, where it really looked like someone stomped the snow down, and then continued through a small, narrow walkway between the house and the barn, where under the snow were quite a lot of shards of old roof tiles. Noone living in our village would ever go there because it just wouldn't make sense. Everyone we told about that would laugh at us because we were just stupid little kids. We kept on seeing that strange light for about a month, then it disappeared, never to be seen again. Every time I looked up the hill I had the strange feeling of being watched. DL saw a strange light in the night, looking like someone squatting near a tree holding a lantern. Got to see strange footsteps there on the next day. Used to be scared as hell and feeling watched for years. Taylor Rage Against. When I was younger, about 10 or 11, I lived in a house in California with a decent-sized property, about an acre. Where my room sat on the side of the house we had a side yard that we had our motorhome under a cover. Being as young as I was, my bedtime was about 8 o'clock or so, and my dad was known to do things outside fairly late in the night. He had a detached garage in the back he would work on projects in. Well, one particular night, I had just gone to bed and was laying awake when I saw a strange yellow light outside my window. I looked out expecting to see my dad and the shadow of the motorhome, but I didn't, just yellow light. Now this light filled my entire room. I could see every inch and corner of my room, nothing like a normal flashlight, and I knew for a fact that my dad didn't have a flashlight that bright or color. As I'm staring at this light for a few minutes, almost like I was stuck in a trance, I see a figure in the light. This figure was human looking, but not quite. Its head was much too large for a normal human, and it was extremely skinny. I was absolutely stunned by this until it lifted a skinny arm up, held an open hand up, waved, and vanished along with the light. I sat there blinking in the darkness for a second, trying to figure out what I had just seen. I slowly got out of bed, walked out to the living room to find my dad sitting in his recliner, drinking a beer and watching TV. I stood there for a second and he looked over at me and asked me what was up. I asked him, "Dad, were you just out by the motorhome?" He says no and asked me why. I didn't know what to say, I didn't know what to think, I just kind of shook my head and went back to bed. That I went out the next day and could not find any sign of anything I had seen the previous night. To this day I have no idea what I saw or what to think of it. Taylor Rage Against. When I was younger, about 10 or 11, I lived in a house in California with a decent-sized property, about an acre. Where my room sat on the side of the house we had a side yard that we had our motorhome under a cover. Being as young as I was, my bedtime was about 8 o'clock or so, and my dad was known to do things outside fairly late in the night. He had a detached garage in the back he would work on projects in. Well, one particular night, I had just gone to bed and was laying awake when I saw a strange yellow light outside my window. I looked out expecting to see my dad and the shadow of the motorhome, but I didn't, just yellow light. Now this light filled my entire room. I could see every inch and corner of my room, nothing like a normal flashlight, and I knew for a fact that my dad didn't have a flashlight that bright or color. As I'm staring at this light for a few minutes, almost like I was stuck in a trance, I see a figure in the light. This figure was human looking, but not quite. Its head was much too large for a normal human, and it was extremely skinny. I was absolutely stunned by this until it lifted a skinny arm up, held an open hand up, waved, and vanished along with the light. I sat there blinking in the darkness for a second, trying to figure out what I had just seen. I slowly got out of bed, walked out to the living room to find my dad sitting in his recliner, drinking a beer and watching TV. I stood there for a second and he looked over at me and asked me what was up. I asked him, "Dad, were you just out by the motorhome?" He says no and asked me why. I didn't know what to say, I didn't know what to think, I just kind of shook my head and went back to bed. That I went out the next day and could not find any sign of anything I had seen the previous night. To this day I have no idea what I saw or what to think of it.